Welcome to Family Addiction Coaching, a podcast about families supporting a loved one with addiction. Each episode will provide insight into a real family's experience, what families find useful and not, what is available in the community, and what would help make their journey easier. Similar to what happens in our coaching service, we'll discuss how families have encouraged their loved one into recovery, as well as their own family recovery. We'll also discuss harm reduction, an especially useful approach for those with no current interest in recovery. I'm your host, Patrick Doyle of Family Addiction Coaching. With a master's degree in social work, I'm licensed by the state of Massachusetts and comply with the strict code of ethics of the National Association of Social Workers. Addiction treatment programs need to start providing culture-informed care to Black American addiction patients. This means giving patients tools for coping with the traumatic daily impact of racism to provide a healthy alternative to substance use. If any treatment programs are offering this, I'm not aware of them, and I ask you to please contact me. Some seem to think not being racist is enough. It's not. We all need to strive towards being anti-racist. If you don't know what that means or how to do it, there are many resources available. One that I can highly recommend is simply do an internet search for, quote, anti-racist resource guide, Google, created by Victoria Alexander. If you released a statement that basically says all lives matter, you have sent out a damaging message and should retract it. We have seen leaders ask Black people to share their traumas so that the former can better understand the issues. It is not up to those who have been discriminated against and oppressed to teach you. There are many resources to learn from. Some have not wanted to use phrases like Black Lives Matter because they think it's political. It's not. This is about standing up to racism and injustice. If you're not sure you want to do that, that is worrisome. All lives will not matter until Black lives matter. Let me say it again. All lives will not matter until Black lives matter. What I've seen white people posting is, quote, I understand that I'll never understand, but with you, I stand. I'm really happy to be recording this episode this week, especially when there has been so much going on in the world, not only COVID-19, but also the murders of 3 Black people in particular past few months by police and the resulting protests. So I'm here with my good friend Amanda S. We wanted to put something out to acknowledge the really hard time that America is going through and perhaps shed some light and give some hope to people and families who are struggling with addiction. Family addiction recovery is still possible. I'm Patrick Doyle. I coach families with addiction to help families gain health and recovery. I am in recovery myself from depression and anxiety, which started in my childhood. I developed depression and struggled with that for several years until I did ultimately seek treatment and have been in recovery for many years now. As a result of my own personal experiences, I also found a great career as a clinical social worker. With me tonight is my good friend Amanda S. Amanda, thank you so much for participating in this with me.
Thank you for having me. I'm a person and advocate in sustained recovery from addiction on medicated assisted treatment, and I also have chronic pain and mental illness.
Thank you for sharing, Amanda. Although it might be hard to keep track of family addiction and recovery and such, when there is a person in active addiction, they are still at extremely high risk. So we want to emphasize that it's always a good idea to strike while the iron's hot and try to help somebody out if they are struggling. I think it's real important to make 3 points. One is that not only has COVID-19 put a tremendous amount of additional stress on everybody. But now with the murders of the Black Americans, with the violence against protesters, the stress from both of these developments could be possibly adding barriers to accessing quality treatment for addiction. Second point, we want to emphasize that any barrier to treatment can be overcome and that recovery is still possible. And it's usually best to not delay an effort to move towards recovery and get involved in treatment. With some addiction illnesses, you don't know how much time you may even have. And then thirdly, that family addiction coaching support improves outcomes. One of the developments that has given me some hope that lasting change may be starting to happen, I'm seeing more and more people taking a strong stand against racism. Dr. John Kelly from the Recovery Research Institute of Massachusetts General Hospital, he issued a statement. He was kind enough to give us permission to read this. And Dr. Kelly's a researcher researching into addiction and treatment and what works. The death of George Floyd is tragic and shameful. It is a reminder that we must use our respective voices to illuminate the unique inequities faced by Black and other minority individuals in the United States. In addiction treatment and recovery research, such a contribution includes illuminating racial and ethnic health disparities. These contributions can, of course, make the most impact not just by identifying them, but also examining how to address them with the goal of ensuring everybody has access to high-quality, science-based care, regardless of race, ethnicity, or socioeconomic status.
Americans are speaking up about how upset and concerned they are more than ever. Media playing the video of George Floyd's murder, the protest, the violence against protesters and against property. They're playing it on a constant cycle. How can we stay informed without becoming overloaded or overwhelmed by the constant viewing of this footage?
There are times when I've caught myself, all of a sudden, I've been watching the news footage of violence against the protesters. 2 hours goes by. It can become hypnotic. Too much exposure to disturbing, violent material can easily raise our anxiety level. It's important to limit how much we expose ourselves to. Otherwise, we risk increasing our own anxiety and stress level. I've seen experts point out that usually the information that you need to follow, even during COVID-19, when that started, you can pretty much gain what you need to gain most days in about 5 minutes. I find videos difficult in the sense that we don't know what's going to happen next. The news media tend to keep replaying the same violent segments of video over and over again, endlessly. A few years ago, there was a person that I was working with was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. There were certain anniversaries or dates or events that would trigger her symptoms. One of the things that we worked on together was helping her unplug herself from seeing the news, seeing the videos. It really did help her stabilize. It helped her manage her stress. If we use the print media, we don't have that clickbait. You see an image on video and you may not be prepared for it. Whereas with the print media, if an article starts getting too difficult, you can stop reading it. It's much easier to disengage from print media, I find, than video media.
Saturday, we turned the TV on to watch the SpaceX shuttle launch. I hadn't been paying much attention to the protests or anything that was going on the week prior. I knew that they were happening, but I wasn't watching them. And after turning the shuttle launch on, I ended up watching it all weekend. Like, I was glued to the TV for 3-4 hours before I looked away and got up and did something else. I mean, it pulled me right in, and I just, I'm watching all these peaceful protests, and it's like I could almost tell right when things were going to turn. And, I texted my partner and I was like, this is not going to be good this weekend. You could just, that energy, it comes right through the TV. And then I had to completely unplug from it. I haven't been watching the news again, and it helps.
The protests, for the most part, started off comfortable. It's great that people are out there expressing themselves, coming together with something important to make an important statement. In Europe, all over the world, such huge numbers of people who are out protesting the violence in America towards Black people in general. One gets a sense that this may may lead to permanent change.
Can you describe some of the effects that COVID-19 is having on us, and especially like on families with addiction?
It seems like COVID has been with us forever, yet we've been in the shelter at home mode for 2.5 months or so. And in terms of understanding what it does psychologically, it's too soon to know for sure about that. What we do recognize are some of the unique challenges of COVID-19 for people experiencing addiction. Some of these challenges are structural. The healthcare system is not prepared to take care of them. We don't have near the capacity to effectively treat all who struggle with addiction. Even getting adequate staffing in addiction treatment programs has been a problem since COVID-19. One family that I've been working with, their adult son was fortunate to have been admitted to a residential program that has a good reputation. It started off going well. The family and we were all relieved that he was safe and sound. He had been homeless before that. However, pretty soon we saw that the staff wasn't able to show up for work. I was asking about the curriculum in the program, and the curriculum reportedly involved the staff giving cigarettes out. They got 3 square meals a day, and they were safe, and that was about it. So people weren't getting counseling, they weren't getting group time. Even when it came time to find aftercare and to try to find a certified sober living program, my client was not able to use the internet, was not able to use the telephone system either. Most hospitals and residential treatment programs have only now started offering telehealth services for addiction. Challenges with COVID-19 relate also to stigma and social issues. Addiction has been called a disease of isolation. And the concept of social distancing makes such people even more vulnerable because it interferes with many of the support systems that can help. Experts now are distinguishing between physical versus social distancing and emphasize that we keep a physical distance, but make extra efforts to maintain social bonds with each other during this time of enormous stress. And on top of that, drug use in and of itself negatively impacts human physiology, making one more vulnerable to becoming infected and more vulnerable to worse outcomes. So that's why there's a tremendous concern about the COVID-19 and the addiction epidemic colliding with each other. All the time, we're hearing from a lot of people who are really struggling with the whole shelter at home, especially if they were in really tight quarters, if they're in small apartments. You might have a couple who are sharing a studio apartment and there's like one big room and there's nowhere else to go. People, if they're lucky, they're able to work from home. So you might have both partners working from home in a pretty small studio apartment.
Rough.
And that's all. Yeah, that's all they have. That's tough. Don't get any alone time.
Right, you can't even, go into a bedroom and close the door, and especially not in a studio apartment. I've lived in studio apartments and it's 500 square feet of one room. It's tough.
Right. I mean, you're always around each other. And if you're both working from home, I don't know how you do it. If you're on the phone or if you're in an online staff meeting or some kind of meeting, it's incredibly stressful. I've also taken calls from people looking for advice and guidance on what to do when one of their family members is not willing to observe the CDC guidelines. They're not doing the physical distancing. They're not wearing masks. They think COVID-19 is a hoax. Other family members they're listening to science and medicine and the public health experts, and they understand their risks and they are observing CDC guidelines, and they don't know what to do with each other. They're getting so upset at each other. They feel the need for counseling support to help them figure out how to deal with this.
I can't even imagine living at home. Like if I lived with my parents, if I was actively using, can't imagine. I mean, my parents would be on edge. They wouldn't want me using any drugs in their home. And
right.
If I was trying to be responsible and follow the guidelines, I mean, I should be at home, and I can't. It's such a complicated situation.
I mean, suppose you have a family member who's living with you, or maybe they came back to home because of the pandemic, and they are using. You may not want to have anything to do with that, but what are you going to do? Are you going to kick them out to be homeless? Where else is there for them to go? A lot of people who are still working are getting their own places so they don't come home to their families each night and possibly pass on an infection to them. So in general, the housing market has gotten extremely tight. So a lot of families are feeling trapped between protecting themselves, protecting their loved ones in active use of drugs, and not feeling like they have much of a choice but to try to keep them safe.
If a person who is actively using isn't normally at home with their family and then they are all of a sudden, it seems like a time when family would want to get their loved one help. But then you have to stop and think, how am I going to get them help right now if everything is shut down and if everybody has to stay 6 feet apart and wear masks? And what if they go there and they get sick? What if somebody's sick at the residential treatment center? Are they accepting new patients? It's a lot of barriers. And I remember stress was a major trigger for my substance use. And like, I didn't have strong coping skills when it came to dealing with it. I know if I was in active addiction during this pandemic, I most likely wouldn't be sheltering at home and wouldn't care about the guidelines, unless I was considering or faced with entering treatment. Of course, then I'm going to have all the excuses and reasons in the world to not go. But active addiction or not, like navigating the barriers that existed prior to COVID-19 were hard enough. So I can't imagine how confusing it must feel for anyone needing to enter treatment right now.
I continue to get calls from families. They're in a crisis and they're looking for help. They don't know, especially with COVID-19, they don't know if emergency rooms are open for business except for COVID-19 patients. In some situations, it's like the end of a rope. I was contacted on a Saturday by the spouse of a person with a serious alcohol use disorder. And we had a coaching session basically right then and there. She couldn't be living with him anymore with his alcohol use, the impact on the family. They had kids and she needed to get him somewhere and he was refusing to get treatment. So we worked for an hour and a half about an approach that she could use. She was determined. She had come to this decision that they were not going to be together while he was actively drinking. I helped her look at her options and recommended a really high quality dual diagnosis treatment program as perhaps the best suited to help her husband. What was interesting is that she reached out that very night to this program. That program happened to have a bed and instructed her that if she could get her husband to go to an emergency department to be medically evaluated for withdrawal symptoms, but also for COVID-19, if he got a negative COVID-19 test result, they could admit him the next day. So the next morning she got up, she had a discussion. She was very firm. And lo and behold, he went to the emergency department, got a test, got evaluated. And within a day, he had gotten admitted to one of the best programs I've ever worked with. The client she was a force. She was going to make it happen. He was going to leave the house. And if he wanted her help, she would help him get into this quality program. It worked. And it was amazing to see. I don't know that I've ever seen anything happen so well in such a short period of time. Once in a while, I get contacted by persons with addiction. A couple of weeks ago, I was contacted by a person who was really sick, going through severe alcohol withdrawal. His wife couldn't tolerate it any longer and had to ask him to leave the home. He was real sick, going through withdrawals. He couldn't report how much he had been drinking or when he had last drunk, but he did want to get treatment. He wanted to get to a hospital, get to a safe place and get medical care. And he knew that he needed it. He knew that he was in trouble. So after talking to him for a while, it was clear that he wasn't in a position to arrange for his own transfer to a hospital or an ED. He gave me permission to contact his wife. So I called his wife. Not really knowing what to expect. I knew that she was frustrated and asked him to leave. When I got her on the phone, she was very responsive, very receptive to helping. And she said, that's all I wanted him to do was agree to get help. What do I do? I said, well, you've got an emergency room close to you. Bring him to the closest place. And if you feel comfortable transporting him, that could work out fine. It might be better than an ambulance. An ambulance might not be necessary. And I offered to, with her and his permission, I asked if they wanted me to contact the emergency room staff. And they both really appreciated that. It was such a positive experience. I could get through to the ER staff and the triage nurse. She was extremely warm, welcoming, receptive. She was the epitome of professionalism. She was very accepting, welcoming. She was glad to hear that the patient was being brought in by his wife. She took information carefully down. And I found out later that he was admitted to the ER, was medically stabilized, and then the next day he was transferred to a residential rehabilitation program for addiction, good quality one. It was very touching that even in a period of COVID-19 and how difficult it was for healthcare staff and not having enough personal protective equipment or ventilators and such, but for this triage nurse to be so open and receptive, it was amazing. It was a miracle. I was a little hesitant to call. I didn't want to burden them, with everything that they're dealing with, but they did such a great job. It was really heartwarming and very impressive.
I've always wanted to have somebody on my side that could call ahead of time to the ER, to any type of treatment facility. I mean, because think about it. Usually when people have to be admitted to a psychiatric hospital or an emergency hospital or any type of center, you're usually not calm or feeling well, or sometimes not in the right mind to express yourself in the right way. So for a professional like you that can call ahead and talk on a professional level to another healthcare professional and be like, listen, somebody's coming in, this is their symptom. So incredibly helpful. I mean, like, I have wanted somebody to help me in situations like that so many times. It's awesome that you did that. Can you do that for me when I need you to, Patrick?
You got it.
Awesome.
You got it. Anytime, 24/7. Actually, I do work 24/7. I am available to my families 24/7. But you got it, Amanda. You got it. Through experience, we just find that if you don't have someone on your side advocating for you, you don't know what you're going to get. We hear so many stories about people who went to an emergency room, stabilized, given IV fluids, maybe given Librium medication, and then basically they were discharged with a list of residential programs that they could call. Of course, the person, as soon as they leave the emergency room, they're feeling sick. They're going to be looking for their drug of choice, most likely. It never seemed to work out well. We just learned that by calling ER staff, giving them the courtesy, recognizing that they're super busy, and with a little bit of advance notice about some clinical information that will help them take care of the patient, they're amazing. They really appreciate that. And when they get that kind of advance notice, patients in their care get really good experiences. They rise to the occasion because they were met with professionalism and someone like me to make that call and give them important information. It's as if it inspires them to rise to the occasion too. They recognize that this person, the patient coming in, is someone's parent or someone's child or someone's friend. And sometimes I have to get involved with a residential program because I'm hearing from family that the care doesn't seem to be going very well. When I call and make an inquiry and releases of information are signed, the staff do much better. They're always receptive to information that I have that was new information to them. The staff at a residential program is as if they rise to the occasion too.
Are there other things you commonly do that are unique to family addiction coaching and the service that you provide your clients and families?
Oftentimes, families are not included in communications or meetings, which is very different from every other type of medical treatment. Most addiction treatment programs like to keep the families away. They talk about HIPAA. Sometimes they're given really bad advice to patients about needing to split up from their spouses if they have any hope of finding recovery. So it's common that if a family asks me to call and try to interface with the treatment team staff, oftentimes they will be responsive. Things like discharge planning. Sometimes the facilities, they don't involve the family at all. And so sometimes they get a notification from the patient, tomorrow morning I'm going to get discharged. And the family's really nervous. They don't feel that the patient has had enough time. Well, you can refuse to accept them home. And most programs won't discharge a patient to the street. You can insist upon that. And in my experience, most programs will then cooperate with that, but they won't make it easy for you. So that's oftentimes the kind of thing that I am asked to be involved with.
It sounds like you're a problem solver and navigate through a bunch of difficulties and break down those barriers. And it's just nice that you enable families access to healthcare. What if someone isn't interested in treatment or recovery, though? What can you do and how can you help with that?
I would say probably more times than not that's the kind of situation that a family will call me about, that their loved one is either really struggling with recovery and with treatment, staying involved with it, or they might not be interested in it at all. We talk a lot about harm reduction. Basically, harm reduction is an approach that helps family members establish and maintain a loving relationship with a person who is using drugs, at not encouraging them to turn their back on the person or letting them hit rock bottom or giving them ultimatums. If you're giving an ultimatum thinking that it's going to motivate a person, you're probably going to be disappointed because the coercion route generally doesn't work. Patients do best with treatment that they are motivated to pursue, that they're invested in, that makes sense to them, even if it's not perhaps the gold standard of treatment for that particular disorder. But if a patient makes a decision and is invested in that, they tend to do better than if they're pushed into something. And there's some families that I've been working with for a couple of years now that the person with the addiction tends to go from a crisis to a crisis with some stability. A lot of times the family's calling up saying, what do we do now? What do we do now? I explained it to a mother of an adult son. Well, if your son had HIV, AIDS, and was refusing treatment for that, would you turn your back on them? Would you not want to have any communication with them? She said, well, of course not. Why would I do that? That would be so cruel. Think of addiction like that. What would possess anyone to think that turning your back on a person with addiction because they weren't interested in treatment, that would be therapeutic or that would motivate someone to obtain care or treatment? It's ludicrous. A lot of families become very confused by what they hear from friends and sometimes from self-help groups out in the community. But it seems like with addiction, everybody has an opinion. Everybody thinks they know what's best for that other person, whether it's a person using drugs or whether it's the family of a person using drugs. So these poor families, they get such bad advice. They get such blame and so much judgment. And I don't know what happened to our society, but a lot of people seem to get off on saying, well, that would never happen in my family. And wow, what did you do wrong? You made your bed, you got to lie in it. Families get dumped on a lot. And even by the treatment industry, a lot of times families get dumped on and blamed very harshly. In my experience, nothing good can come from that. And it's not true. To be able to explain and educate a family that it's not their fault and that they're doing a great job. Every conversation I have, every coaching session, I always at least end it with that you're doing a terrific job. Thank God that your loved one has you in their life. You're helping them stay alive. Pointing out the positives of what they're doing, what they're accomplishing. A lot of times they've lost the ability to even see that. So that can be so therapeutic, so helpful, and it can help a family feel good. So that's a lot of the work. Once the family feels good and they have a more realistic perspective about how they can help, it helps them make decisions for the future and decisions that are in their own best interest and oftentimes in their loved one's best interest as well.
I know my my mom, and probably my dad too, he doesn't talk about it very much, but I know my mom was so worried for years after I had gotten recovery that they had enabled me in some way. I know that when she did have the chance to talk to you in the interview that you did with her, you educated her about harm reduction and lifted this huge weight from her shoulders. She's felt so much better about everything since then.
When I explained the term harm reduction to her, she squealed. It was so cute. She gave this little shriek. She said, "Really?" And that was a good thing to do. And I said, "Yeah, that was a good thing to do. Look at your daughter now. She's 10 years in recovery. She's an awesome person. You've got this fantastic, loving family relationships. Who knows what would have happened to her if you and your husband weren't around?" She's such a neat woman, really fascinating to hear how she came up with these ideas of the harm reduction, because, I mean, nobody called it harm reduction back then. I heard that your father would put deadbolts on your bedroom door when you went to a new, rooming house.
They were really, they taught me to be really proactive. And I moved around a lot. So anytime I got a new rental, my dad would install a deadbolt on my bedroom door. And then I had an apartment, but there was a small window that somebody could get easy access to, and he welded and built bars over the window.
Oh, wow.
Yes, they've all, and he just did it. Wow. I didn't ask him to do it. I didn't feel I was in a bad area. I was, but they just did that stuff.
Wow. Your father could see the danger, the risk much clearer
they never
than
liked
you could.
The areas that I was living in. So they always came through and made sure it was secure.
Everything that they did was just love and on a gut level, and they wanted to protect you. They didn't turn their backs on you. They just hung around, hoping and praying that you would get into recovery somehow. And then lo and behold, it happened. It's really awesome.
Yeah, my mom, she really liked talking to you. And anytime someone contacts me for help getting a loved one into treatment, I always recommend you. You're genuine. You have 40 years experience. You know the industry inside and out. I mean, you work at a crisis call center in your spare time, and you're easy to get along with and determined to solve a problem. So I've learned a lot from you. I think we should just tell people where they can find you at if they need help or if they want to learn more about you. And that's at familyaddictioncoach.com.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Family Addiction Coaching. And if you liked what you heard, please subscribe to the show. We'll continue to interview interesting and strong families as long as there is a need for this information in the community. Make sure to visit our website, www.opioidcoaching.com. If you think you might want professional coaching for yourself or your family, Patrick Doyle is available. Have a peaceful day.